Okay, well, it's 10 o'clock, so we might have a few more people join us, but that's okay. I just want to do introductions first, make sure everybody knows who I am. First, thank you for joining this webinar for Emergency Financial Assistance at the Tennessee Coalition. We're really excited to have you all here today. We appreciate you joining in. My name is Megan Batista. I'm the Rural Program Specialist here at the Tennessee Coalition. I also coordinate the Emergency Financial Assistance Fund. And I really love that the Coalition is able to operate this fund. I'm excited about it, and I'm excited to get to share more about it with all of you today. So thanks again for being here. I also want to introduce my co-host here, Dawn Harper. Most of you probably know Dawn. She's the Associate Director here at the Coalition, and she's here to provide any support and technical assistance as we go along. So thanks, Dawn, for being here.
Thanks for having me, Megan.
Okay, thank you all for testing audio for me. Please feel free to use that chat box at any time during my presentation. If you have any questions, we'll be checking there for those. I would also love to know how many of you have used emergency financial assistance through the Coalition in the past. So if you'll just type in that chat box and tell me, have you utilized this fund before? Are you just here for a refresher today? Maybe you're a new advocate and you're just learning about this fund for the first time. So let me know in the chat box kind of where your knowledge and experience is with emergency assistance. Can I expand this? Okay, Nora says, we've used it in the past when funding was available, but many new staff have not. Okay, thank you. I've used this fund before from Courtney, have not used emergency assistance in Tennessee. All right, awesome. Thanks for joining, Robin. Hopefully we'll have lots of new information for you today. Anyone else? It's good to know kind of where everybody is at with their knowledge and experience. Jay says, I've never used it, but my clients have used it before. Okay, great. Yeah, we do have a lot of survivors who will just submit these applications on their own without the help of an advocate. That happens sometimes. I'm glad to know that survivors are utilizing it for sure. Okay, awesome. Thank you all for that feedback. I appreciate it. And now let's go ahead and get started. So the purpose of this webinar is to help you all as advocates to go through the emergency financial assistance application process. And, you know, to help your clients as they're submitting these applications. We have three main objectives today. It's my goal that at the end of this webinar, we will, one, have a better understanding of what types of assistance can be covered by the fund, two, that you'll know how to correctly complete the application, and three, that you'll know what to expect once you have submitted an application for a client. And then towards the end of the webinar, we'll have an opportunity to look at some case studies. So I'll offer a few imaginary examples of applications. I just created these based on ones that I frequently see, and we'll get to talk about whether those specific scenarios would or would not be eligible for approval. As far as who is eligible, the Coalition's emergency fund is reserved for survivors who are in the process of fleeing abuse or who are establishing safe housing after having fled abuse. The fund covers the entire state of Tennessee, which is great. So any domestic or sexual violence survivor in the state may be eligible for the fund. I should note, however, that funding is limited to be given only once per survivor. So if the survivor you are working with has received funding assistance from the Coalition in the past, just know that they cannot be approved for it again. I just saw that Jay asked a question. After this webinar, will I be able to refer back to it as a recording? Yeah, right? Okay, yes, absolutely, Jay. It will be recorded. And I think we'll send out a link to the recording and all of that as well. So yeah, thank you for asking that, Jay. All right, so the coalition is also required to reserve this fund as a fund of last resort. And what we mean by that is that we have to see that other possible means of assistance have been explored before we can give approval. And this is where we really need your help as the advocate working directly with the client and working directly in your service area. We rely on you to help the survivor look for other possible means of assistance before applying for assistance at the coalition. Now, of course, we often make exceptions to this rule. There are often situations when the need is just simply too urgent to spend time exhausting every single other agency in your area. We absolutely take time constraints into consideration. And it's always our goal as well to help, get help to survivors in the most timely and trauma-informed way that we can. But we do run out of these funds frequently, as those of you who've utilized the fund before know. Sometimes we'll go like 2 to 3 month stretches without having funds at all. So we want to make these funds stretch just as long as we can. And we want to reserve the funds for those survivors who otherwise couldn't receive help anywhere else. Okay, so that's a little bit on who is eligible for the fund. Now let's look at what types of needs are eligible to be covered. So here you can see some examples of needs that can and cannot be covered. These are not exhaustive lists. They are simply the requests we see most often. So we approve a lot of utility and rent payments, a lot of bus tickets and gas cards. We can approve some hotel stays, but only under some really strict conditions. So we don't approve those very frequently, but I'll talk more about those special conditions in a moment. The types of requests we cannot cover are those for medications and medical expenses, most hotel stays, non-emergency needs, and that would be things like cable, internet, furniture. We can't approve requests for food, and we cannot make payments directly to survivors or with money orders or cashier's checks, unfortunately. We also can't approve storage units, but I have an asterisk here next to moving trucks because the coalition cannot rent a moving truck ourselves on behalf of a survivor. However, we have found that some programs are willing to rent the truck on behalf of the survivor and receive reimbursement from the coalition, if approved, of course. So for liability reasons, again, the coalition cannot purchase or rent the truck ourselves, but we may be able to reimburse your agency if you are willing to take on that liability. So that's something to keep in mind. Now we're going to talk about some more specifics as to the types of needs we can cover. And I'll start with rental and utility payments. These are the requests that we definitely see most often. First, please do not submit an application for a rent or utility deposit until after the survivor has been approved for a new place. So sometimes we receive applications from survivors. Typically, these are ones that don't come through an advocate, but if a survivor is submitting it just on their own, they'll submit it when they have not yet been approved for a new place, when they're just still in the process of looking, because they, of course, want to know ahead of time if they can be approved for assistance. So I certainly appreciate this concern for the future and their desire to plan ahead. But we unfortunately cannot approve a request until the entirety of the need is known and all of the documentation is in order, which leads me to my next point, which is that supporting documentation is required. It's mandatory for all rental and utility payments. So this is a policy we have not always enforced in the past, but in the past couple of months, we've made it really a no exceptions rule. Especially to rental and utility payments. So this is just for our financial records and for auditing purposes, so we can show we've done our due diligence and we know the funds are going to the correct account and all of that. So if the request is for a payment or rent payment, that is, we have to be sent a copy of the lease agreement. or if the request is for a rent deposit and say a lease agreement has not been drawn up yet, that's okay, but we will have to see some form of documentation from the landlord showing that the applicant has been approved for the new place, and that will show the deposit amount and stuff like that. And then for utility payments, we have to have a copy of the current bill, or a copy of the contract would be okay if a current bill is not in place yet because they're just requesting money for a deposit. And then this final bullet point here applies to all requests, not just rent and utility payments, but I include it here because rent payments are almost always higher than the cap amount that we provide. So typically that cap amount is $300, and say the amount being requested exceeds $300, we have to see that there is some plan in place for how the remaining balance will be paid. So say the rent is for $500, that's how much they're needing, but the cap amount at the coalition is $300. We have to know that the survivor has some way to make up that remaining $200, whether that's through another agency or through their own money. We want to make sure that the funds are truly going to benefit the survivor in a real sustainable way. All right, moving on. These are additional details you'll want to know about applying for bus tickets and gas cards. So bus tickets and gas cards almost always can only be used for the purpose of fleeing to safety. Sometimes that looks like getting the survivor to a safe family member who can help them get back on their feet. Sometimes this looks like getting the survivor to the only available shelter that happens to be halfway across the state. We cannot approve gas cards or bus tickets for like day-to-day errands or for any other purpose other than getting the survivor to safety or maintaining their safety. And with requests for bus tickets or gas cards, the coalition always prefers that your agency make that purchase with the survivor, as long as you've received approval from the coalition first, of course. And then the coalition can cut your agency a check to reimburse you for that. And we like to do this because it really just streamlines the process for everyone involved, especially in the case of gas cards. You know, there's typically a really urgent need to get the gas card to the survivor immediately. But if we're the ones purchasing that, we have to go out and make the purchase and then place it in the mail and wait for it to arrive to the survivor. So we do ask that, if at all possible, your agency work that out directly with the survivor. Now, again, though, please do not make this purchase expecting to get reimbursed by the coalition until after you have received approval on an application or have at least received pre-approval from us. So we understand that sometimes these cases are very urgent and a decision has to be made quickly. In those instances, we just ask that if at all possible, you at least give us a call and talk to us about the situation. We can discuss it over the phone. And you know, if it seems like they meet eligibility, then I'll very likely tell you to go ahead and make the purchase and that you could submit an application later if time really does not permit you to submit an application first. But it could be that we're out of funds at that time, or there could be something about the request that doesn't actually meet eligibility. So we can't guarantee that we'll be able to reimburse you on a purchase without having given you some pre-approval on that. So, and you'll also want to know that the coalition calculates the amount for gas cards. So we'll just need to know the mileage, you know, the starting and the ending destination for the survivor, and then we'll calculate how much in gas money we'll be able to get them. Okay, hotel stays. These are my toughest requests because I receive these requests fairly often, but it's really rare that we're able to approve them. The coalition does not consider hotel stays the best use of these funds. We can only consider them under these 3 strict conditions. So first, they may only be considered for short-term stays. Second, and possibly most importantly, they can only be considered if the survivor is transitioning to housing that has already been secured. And when we say transitioning here, what we mean is that the survivor will have the ability, definitely have the ability to move into new housing immediately following the hotel stay. And they could not stay anywhere else in that time. So it truly has to be a last resort and a short-term, a truly transitional option for them. And then the last point to make here is that the survivor and the hotel manager will be required to sign liability waivers provided by the coalition. This is another one of those things that we've only implemented, I think, in the past 6 months or so. But we do require this with all hotel stays, and we have thankfully never had an issue with any hotel manager being willing to sign these liability waivers. So it's an extra step, but it's usually no trouble really at all. We do this because hotel stays are booked with the coalition credit card, and the coalition cannot be responsible for any additional fees that could be tacked on to the card during the duration of the stay. Things like room service or damages to the room, the coalition just can't be held liable for those things. So we have to have the liability waivers signed for those. All right, well, that concludes our section on what types of needs can be covered by the fund. I do want to say again, though, that those are not the only needs that we will ever cover. We do see some unique requests every now and again that we may be able to approve, just depending on, all the other information and the circumstances. So please always feel free to ask about other types of requests. Now we're going to move on to actually completing the application. All right, I know this may seem trivial to say, but I want to express why I really think it's important for us to have a thorough and an efficient application process. When incomplete applications are submitted to us, the process ends up being prolonged a bit, which of course is not ideal for anyone involved, but we've also found that having to go back and forth with the survivor multiple times for additional information, that can just cause unnecessary added stress and even trauma on the survivor. So we want to do everything we can to minimize that, of course. We never want a survivor to feel like we're asking them for additional information because we do not believe them or we don't see the legitimacy of their need. So we want to set a high standard for trauma-informed care, and that means incorporating trauma-informed practices into everything we do. I think even the most menial tasks like filling out a form. And I know that all of you feel that too and know how important it is. So we just ask for your support in that. So the first point I want to make here is that we want to see complete applications. We want to see that every question is answered on those. Every question is there for a purpose. We ask that you not include the survivor's full last name, and that's just for confidentiality, privacy reasons. So first name and last initial only, that's all we need to see. Please include your contact information, of course, and if there's another advocate working with you and the survivor, you could also include their contact info as well, just to make sure that we're able to follow up with someone. The application also asks for demographics, and those questions are for reporting purposes only. They in no way affect eligibility, so if a survivor doesn't want to answer those questions, if for some reason they feel uncomfortable answering those, that's totally fine. You can move past them. This next one is very important though. Please be clear in the description section about how the remaining balance will be paid. So this is what I mentioned earlier regarding rental payments. If the amount that the survivor is requesting exceeds the cap amount available, we have to see that there's a definite and a clear plan in place for how that remaining balance will be paid. Further, please include information about any other funding assistance the applicant is receiving or has explored, and this just helps us know that our fund is being used as a last resort option. We also ask for payment information on the application, and that should include who the check should be made out to. This cannot be the survivor, of course. Payment can only be sent to, say, the landlord, the electric company, or your agency if you plan to cover the cost up front and then receive reimbursement from the coalition afterwards. And then I covered specific types of supporting documentation that we have to see when we talked a few slides back about rental and utility payments. But sometimes there are other types of needs where we'll also require some supporting documentation, and we'll just reach back out to you for that if you have not already included it in the application. And finally, I know I've already said this a few times, but please do not submit an application for reimbursement or on a purchase that you have already made for, say a gas card or a bus ticket. You have to receive approval, or at the very least pre-approval from the coalition first. And I frequently see advocates will submit an application for a gas card or a bus ticket for reimbursement when they haven't yet spoken to us about getting reimbursement on those. And again, I can't guarantee that we'll be able to reimburse you if we haven't given you that pre-approval. All right, so that was everything you need to know about actually filling out the application. I should note that we will be making a few changes to the application soon. Most of you know that the application is housed on our website. You can find it really easily there under the Emergency Financial Assistance tab. You can submit it right there on the website, or you can download it if you'd rather fill it out by hand, and then you can email it to us. And I'll provide you with that email information later on as well. But we will be making a few changes to the application soon. None of those changes will be different from what you're hearing here today, though, so don't worry about that. You're receiving all the new information now. All right, let's talk about what you and the survivor can expect after you have successfully completed the application. So we strive to respond to every application within 24 hours. And I think we do really well with that. There are rare circumstances when it may take over a day, but please know that we feel the urgency of these applications for sure. And we do everything we can to respond just as soon as possible. To my next point, I don't think this happens very often at all. But just as a reminder, please do not make any promises to the survivor. Even if they appear to be perfectly eligible, we may have to deny them because we ran out of funds the day before, which happens. We do run out of funds far too frequently. But once a program team member has approved the application, we pass it off to our finance team. And it's their policy to send checks out within 1 to 2 business days. So it's pretty quick turnaround on those, but please let us know if the need requires more urgency than that. We're absolutely willing to work with you to explore making payment over the phone or over the internet. We can look at other options depending on the need. And finally, if the survivor's application is approved, we ask that you just remind the survivor that the coalition will be following up with them within 1 to 2 months afterwards. And this is just to ask a few evaluation questions and check on their safety. So we want to give them a heads up about that. All right, I promised that we would go over some case studies. So now we're going to do that before we end. I've created 3 side-by-side examples of scenarios that are very similar to one another, but one of these versions of the scenario will be eligible for approval and the other will not. So in this first example, we have a domestic violence survivor who has fled his home due to the abuse. He's staying in one of your shelters. He does have a car, and he could go stay with a safe family member if only he had enough gas money to get him there. So the financial abuse and isolation he's been suffering has cut off his resources, and you as his advocate, you've explored some local funding options, but there's no other program that can cover his gas money to flee. So this is an application that absolutely would be eligible for approval. And say to make it even better, your program can purchase the card for him. So you submit the application, you receive approval from us, you purchase the card with him, and then you send the coalition the receipt to receive reimbursement. It's a very easy, straightforward one. Now, the other version of this story that could not be approved varies in just one respect, and I've highlighted that portion there. So it's the same survivor in the same situation, except that he's not requesting gas money to flee to a family member. He's requesting gas money just for his day-to-day errands, the cost of, getting his kids to school, say. And this is a completely legitimate need, but unfortunately, it's one that we likely would not be able to cover. We would probably have to deny that application. Okay, so another case study. In this example, we have a sexual assault survivor who has been sleeping in her car since her boyfriend, who she lives with, assaulted her last weekend. She has come to your program looking for shelter, but you are at capacity, and the next surrounding shelters are full as well. She wants to stay in this area because it's where her job is, but she has nowhere else to sleep. So she's already been approved for an apartment, yay, but it will not be ready for her to move in for another 4 days. She will be getting some financial help for the move-in costs from a local organization, but there is nowhere that will help her cover the cost of a motel stay for this transition period, just for those 4 days. And without a motel stay, she'll have to sleep in her car. So it's really a last resort option. We rarely see a situation like this that fits the criteria so well. But if I saw this application tomorrow and the coalition had funds available, we would absolutely approve that. The hotel requests that we do frequently see look a lot more like the version of the story on the right side of your screen. So here we have the same survivor in the same situation, but here she hasn't been approved for an apartment yet. So she doesn't know what she would be doing once her motel stay is over. And in that case, we would have to unfortunately deny her application, which I hate. And of course, in those situations, we would do everything we can to support you and help you find some other options for her. But we wouldn't be able to approve her for our funding, unfortunately. Okay, and this final case study is about eligibility based on how far removed the survivor is from fleeing violence and establishing new safe housing. So this is something we haven't really talked about yet, but hopefully this will be a good example for you. So in this situation, the survivor fled abuse and stayed in your shelter for 2 months until they were approved for new safe housing. They just needed help with the electric deposit in order to move in. That is something that would certainly be eligible for the coalition fund. Now, if the survivor had fled abuse and established new safe housing, say 2 years ago, and then they came back to your organization to ask for help paying their electricity deposit, that is an application we would have to deny. It's, again, an entirely legitimate need, but it's not one that the coalition fund is designated to cover. So in that case, we would, again, look for other funding sources in your area and try to connect that advocate or that survivor and you as the advocate with some other options. But we have to reserve the coalition fund for survivors who are fleeing violence or who are establishing new safe housing after having just had violence. Okay, that's my last case study and the end of my presentation. I hope this was helpful for all of you. I want to say thank you as well. Thank you for the work that you all do every day. We couldn't carry out this program without all of you, and you're really vital to this process. So thank you so much. Do we have any questions before we end? Anybody, feel free to type in the chat box if you have a question. We'll give it a few minutes, and I also want to leave you with my contact information. That's me. I always find it helpful to put a face to a voice, so that's me with my husband. And there's the coalition main line along with my direct extension. And then there's the emergency assistance email address. So if you are submitting an application, we ask that you submit it to that email address. That is if you want to fill it out by hand and then send it in to us. And I am not the only one that fills out or that reviews these applications, that is. I'm typically the one that initially receives them, and then I'll divvy them out to other program specialists. So you could be hearing from our other team members here, but when you are corresponding with us, no matter who it is, about an application, I just ask that you send your correspondence to the emergency assistance email address, so we keep all of that in one place. All right, looks like we have some questions. It doesn't let me. Sorry, y'all. We're having a little bit of a technical difficulty just seeing your full questions. Oh, thank you, Jay. I appreciate that. I'm glad to know that it's helpful. Nora asked, the coalition does currently have funding for emergency assistance. So no, we don't at this time. I have a little bit of funding left, full disclosure. I have about $170 at this time. I do have 3 applications, however, 3 applicants that I'm actively working with and seeing if I can gather the rest of their information and get them approved for that tiny bit that we have left. And then after that is gone, we believe it'll be early December when we get our next round of funding in. We can't guarantee that, but that's what we're hopeful for. We think it'll be soon. Jay asks, when is the best time or season to send in applications? Oh, anytime, absolutely. Because of the way our funding sources work and the periods work, we typically are out of funds around November-ish. I've only been doing this since April though, so I can't say definitely. That's what I've been told, is that we do run out of funds pretty fast. So typically before the next round of funding comes in is when we're gonna be out of funds. So we've been really low for the past couple of months. But you can send in applications at any time. And again, if our fund is gone, and we post that on our website, if we're out of funding, we will post there that we are out. But we still ask and encourage you to reach out to us. If you are working with a client who has a financial need, we're still here for technical assistance and support. We will absolutely help direct you and the survivor to some other options. We try to keep up to date on all the available resources in the state, so absolutely. All right, great. Thank you all so much for attending, and thank you for those great questions. I really appreciate it. Please feel free to reach out to me at any time if you just have a question about emergency assistance or any technical assistance need. I hope you'll reach out. So thanks again. Everybody have a great day. And we will be sending out the link to this recording, the audio recording, as well as the video. So thanks so much.